A desperate mother bursts into the emergency room, holding her listless baby. As the nurse investigates, she uncovers a shocking truth that changes everything. The emergency room buzzed with its usual rhythm, a controlled chaos that unfolded every night at Cityview General. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, casting a cold, clinical glow over the rows of chairs in the waiting area and the steady stream of patients coming through the automatic doors. The night shift had its own atmosphere, a mixture of exhaustion and quiet determination. Nurses and doctors moved like well-practiced dancers, balancing the weight of urgency with the necessity for calm. Rachel Matthews had worked here for nearly 10 years, and if there was one thing she had learned, it was how to find stillness in the storm. She stood at the nurses' station, reviewing patient charts with practiced efficiency, her eyes flicking between screens and papers as her hands moved with swift precision. It was just after midnight, the hour when the late-night emergencies began to trickle in. Mostly minor injuries, a few cases of food poisoning, and the occasional intoxicated patient. All in a night's work. The soft hum of the hospital's machinery provided a familiar backdrop as Rachel ran through the evening's patient list. The routine had a way of anchoring her in the chaos, giving her a sense of control over the uncontrollable nature of emergencies. It wasn't glamorous, but it was work that mattered. And on nights like these, she found solace in the rhythm of it all. Tonight had been unusually quiet. The waiting room held only a few patients, an elderly man with chest pains, a teenager nursing a sprained ankle, and a young woman sitting with her arm in a makeshift sling. Rachel had already assigned them all to rooms, and the doctors were handling their cases. The night, so far, had been routine. Rachel allowed herself a moment to stretch, rolling her stiff shoulders back as she sipped from her lukewarm cup of coffee. It wasn't her best night for energy, but she had trained herself to push through. This was the life she had chosen: long hours, missed family dinners, but also the knowledge that she was helping people in their darkest hours. It was a sacrifice she had come to terms with long ago, but it didn't make the fatigue any easier. She glanced up at the clock, 12:13 a.m. "Looks like we're in for a quiet one tonight," muttered Linda, another nurse who had just returned from taking a blood sample in one of the patient rooms. She sat down next to Rachel, her tired smile betraying the long hours they had both clocked in over the past few days. "Don't jinx it," Rachel replied with a smirk, tapping her pen absently against the counter. "We're barely halfway through the shift." As if on cue, the double doors to the ER swung open. The chill of the outside air rushed in, carrying with it the unmistakable sound of rain pelting the pavement. Rachel looked up, her trained eyes immediately locking onto the figure who had entered the room. A young woman, drenched from the rain, her wet hair sticking to her face, her clothes clinging to her frail frame. In her arms, she held a small bundle, tightly wrapped in a tattered blue blanket. The woman's steps were frantic, stumbling as she made her way to the front desk. Rachel's stomach dropped. This wasn't a sprained ankle or a routine case of food poisoning. The young woman's face was pale, and her eyes were wide with terror. "Help!" she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper, cracking with exhaustion and panic. "Please, help my baby." In an instant, Rachel's exhaustion evaporated, replaced by the sharp focus that only true emergencies could bring. She was on her feet before the woman even reached the desk, her mind switching into high gear. Everything else in the room faded into the background. Rachel rushed to the woman's side, gently guiding her toward a chair. "It's okay, I'm here. Let me see the baby," Rachel said, her voice calm but urgent. She had dealt with enough trauma cases to know that keeping the mother calm was half the battle. The baby's condition, however, couldn't wait. The young woman, Maria, looked down at the bundle in her arms as though she didn't want to let go. Her hands trembled as Rachel reached for the baby, carefully peeling back the damp blanket. The sight that greeted Rachel made her heart lurch. The infant's face was disturbingly pale and his breathing was shallow, barely there at all. His tiny chest rose and fell in weak, irregular bursts, as if his body was struggling to pull in each breath. Rachel's training took over. She felt for a pulse, faint but present, and immediately lifted her head, calling out in a clear, authoritative voice. "Code Blue, infant!" The room erupted into motion. Within seconds, a team of nurses and doctors converged, moving with the kind of seamless efficiency that only came from years of practice in the high-stakes world of emergency care. The baby was whisked out of Rachel's arms and into the trauma room, the doors swinging shut behind them as the medical team began their work. Rachel stayed behind with the mother, who was now collapsing into herself, her body shaking with sobs. Rachel knelt beside her, speaking in low, soothing tones. "He's in good hands. We're doing everything we can." "What's your name?" Maria," the woman stammered, her voice barely audible as she tried to control her sobbing. "Maria Sanchez." Rachel nodded, squeezing her shoulder gently. Okay, Maria. I know this is scary, but I need you to stay with me, all right? We're going to help your baby, but I need to ask you a few questions so we know how to treat him. Can you do that?" Maria sniffed, nodding weakly, though her eyes were unfocused, her breathing still ragged from the panic. He was fine this morning, and then I don't know what happened. He just started breathing funny, and I didn't know what to do. Please help him." "We are," Rachel assured her, though something tugged at the back of her mind. There was a vague, unsettled feeling about this whole situation, but she couldn't place it. "How old is your baby?" "Michael," Maria whispered, wiping her tear-streaked face. "He's just over a month old." "Please, you have to help him." Rachel's pen hovered over the clipboard. She jotted down the information but couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Why had Maria waited so long to bring him in? And where was Michael's father? These questions gnawed at her, but there was no time to delve into them now. The priority was the baby. "You did the right thing by coming in, Maria," Rachel said, trying to maintain a soothing tone. "Now, we're going to do everything we can, okay?" Maria nodded again, though her hands were still trembling as she clutched at the edges of her damp coat. Her eyes darted toward the trauma room door, her face contorted in fear. Rachel stood up and made her way to the trauma room, but not before casting one last glance at Maria. Something about the young woman's demeanor unsettled her. Yes, she was terrified, but there was more beneath the surface, something that didn't quite fit with the narrative of a frightened mother. Inside the trauma room, the team was hard at work. Dr. Jameson, the lead physician, met Rachel's gaze as she entered. "We've stabilized him for now," he said in a low voice and not taking his eyes off the infant. "But his oxygen levels are critically low. It looks like a respiratory infection, possibly pneumonia. We're running tests, but the next few hours are going to be crucial." Rachel nodded, her heart heavy as she watched the tiny boy connected to the ventilator, his frail body dwarfed by the machines. "Did the mother give any useful information?" Dr. Jameson asked, adjusting the settings on the ventilator. "Not much," Rachel replied, glancing at the baby's vitals. "She said his name is Michael, and that he's just over a month old. But something feels off. She's panicking, but there's more to it. I can't shake the feeling that she's not telling the whole truth." Dr. Jameson's brow furrowed, his expression shifting from concern to suspicion. "Keep an eye on her. If there's more to this story, we need to know before we make any critical decisions. And if you think something's wrong, we may need to involve security or even the authorities." Rachel agreed, though the thought of calling the police on a terrified young mother filled her with unease. She wanted to believe that Maria was just overwhelmed and scared, but her instincts told her otherwise. As Rachel stepped back into the waiting area, she found Maria standing near the window, staring blankly at the rain-soaked streets outside. The woman's face was pale, her posture tense as if she were bracing for something far worse than bad news. "How is he?" Maria's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the hum of the hospital. "He's stable for now," Rachel said carefully, watching her closely. "We're still running tests, but the doctors are doing everything they can." Maria nodded, but her eyes never left the window, her hands still clenched into fists at her sides. "Thank you," she whispered again, though her voice lacked the relief or gratitude Rachel had expected. Rachel's unease grew. There was something in Maria's eyes, a flicker of guilt or perhaps shame. It was subtle, but Rachel had seen enough patients, enough desperate situations to know when someone was hiding something. As the rain continued to fall outside, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much darker story. Something wasn't right, and the truth, whatever it was, would soon unravel. The minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Rachel couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that had been gnawing at her since Maria had stepped through the hospital doors. Every instinct screamed that something wasn't right, but she couldn't put her finger on it, not until she had the answers. Her hands moved methodically, reviewing patient charts, checking on the progress of other cases, but her mind was elsewhere. It always circled back to the baby in the trauma room and the mysterious woman who claimed to be his mother. At the nurse's station, Linda shuffled paperwork, casting a sidelong glance at Rachel. "You're still thinking about her, aren't you?" Rachel didn't respond immediately. She closed a file, set it aside, and let out a long breath. "I can't stop thinking about her, it just doesn't add up." She waited hours before bringing him in, and she barely knows any details about his condition. What mother wouldn't be in here the moment her baby started struggling to breathe? Linda leaned back in her chair, studying Rachel's face. "I get it, but maybe she's just scared out of her mind. You've seen that before, right? People don't always think clearly in a crisis." Rachel nodded slowly, but her gut told her this was different. "It's more than that. She's hiding something, Linda. I can feel it." Linda gave her a skeptical look but didn't push further. Rachel knew she was right to trust her instincts. They'd saved lives before, and tonight, they were screaming at her to dig deeper. But how? The hospital was a place of trust. Patients confided in them, sometimes reluctantly, but always with the understanding that they would receive help. Rachel didn't want to be accusatory, especially with a woman who seemed so fragile. But there was no denying that Maria's story was full of holes. Rachel glanced at the clock. An hour had passed since baby Michael had been admitted, and she needed to check on his progress. But before she could move, the sight of a figure in the waiting room stopped her in her tracks. Maria was still there, sitting stiffly by the window, her posture rigid, hands clutching her coat as though it were the only thing keeping her grounded. The rain outside streaked down the glass in long, slow lines, mirroring the tension that pulsed through the air. "Stay here," Rachel murmured to Linda, pushing her chair back. "I'm going to talk to her." She approached Maria cautiously, mindful not to startle her. The woman's gaze was distant, fixed on something beyond the stormy night outside. Her pale face reflected in the window's glass, ghostly, almost detached. "Maria?" Rachel called softly. The woman's head jerked slightly as though she hadn't heard her approach. She blinked, tearing her eyes from the rain and focusing on Rachel, though there was a glimmer of something unreadable in her expression. Fear, perhaps, but not the kind Rachel expected. Is he okay?" Maria's voice was thin, strained with an edge of desperation that couldn't be hidden, but also, there was a distance to it, like she was asking about someone else's child. Rachel sat down beside her, keeping her movement slow, deliberate. "Michael is stable for now. The doctors are doing everything they can. But Maria, I need to talk to you. We need to understand exactly what happened tonight." Maria's face remained blank for a moment, her eyes flickering with something akin to panic before she composed herself. She crossed her arms tightly across her chest, her body closing off. "I told you everything," she said quietly, her voice faltering. "I don't know what else you want from me." Rachel softened her tone, but she couldn't back down. "I understand that this is overwhelming, but to help Michael, we need to know more. You said he was fine this morning. Can you tell me exactly when things changed? What were you doing when you noticed something was wrong?" Maria's breathing quickened, and Rachel could see the tension building in her stiff shoulders. Her eyes darted around the room as though searching for an escape route, but there was none. She was cornered, and Rachel could feel her growing agitation. "I don't know," Maria stammered. "He was sleeping, then he started crying a lot. I thought it was just colic or something. Babies cry, right?" "They always cry." Rachel nodded, maintaining eye contact, urging her to continue. "Hey, but then it got worse, didn't it? You said his breathing changed. How long did that go on before you brought him in?" Maria's face paled further. "A few hours, maybe. I don't know." "I don't remember," she snapped, her voice rising as her frustration spilled over. "I was scared. What do you want me to say?" "I didn't know what to do." Rachel held her ground, her voice calm but firm. "It's okay to be scared, Maria. But waiting that long when his breathing was so bad, why didn't you come sooner? Was there something stopping you?" Maria froze, her eyes locking onto Rachel's for the first time with a sharp intensity that sent a shiver down Rachel's spine. For a split second, Maria looked ready to bolt, but instead she lowered her gaze and whispered, I thought it would get better. I didn't know it would get this bad." Rachel watched her carefully, sensing there was more. Something unsaid. something Maria was struggling to keep hidden. She glanced at Maria's trembling hands, the way they clenched the fabric of her coat like it was the only thing anchoring her. "Maria, I want to help you, but I need you to be honest with me. Is there someone else involved? Someone we should know about? Where is Michael's father?" Maria's head shot up, her eyes wide and filled with a raw, unfiltered fear. "No, I told you, there's no one. It's just me and him," she said, her voice cracking. She stood up abruptly, backing away from Rachel, her entire body trembling. Rachel stood as well, trying to remain calm, but the situation was spiraling. "Maria, please. If you're in trouble, we can help you, but we need the truth. You're not alone in this." "I told you everything." Maria's voice rang out louder than before, drawing the attention of the few remaining patients in the waiting room. Her eyes were wild now, darting between Rachel and the exit as if she were calculating how quickly she could get out of there. Rachel knew she was losing control of the conversation. She couldn't push Maria too far, but she also couldn't let her walk out. There was more at stake than just a scared mother and a sick baby. Rachel could feel it in her bones. Something was terribly wrong, and Maria was hiding the key to unlocking the truth. Before she could say anything else, one of the doctors from the trauma room, Dr. Jameson, stepped into the waiting area, a grim look on his face. Rachel's heart leapt into her throat. He caught her eye and gestured for her to come over. "I'll be right back," Rachel said to Maria, who had already started pacing near the window again, her back turned. Rachel crossed the room quickly, her nerves on edge. "Now what's going on?" Dr. Jameson's voice was low, meant only for her ears. "We've done what we can for now. The baby's stable, but barely. His lungs were in worse shape than we thought. Severe respiratory distress, possibly pneumonia. But that's not all. We ran some blood work and something came up." Rachel's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Dr. Jameson handed her a sheet of results. "The blood type. It doesn't match Maria's. We double-checked. The baby, he's not hers." For a moment, Rachel felt the world tilt beneath her. Everything clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Maria wasn't Michael's mother. She had known something was wrong, but this kidnapping. Her mind raced, piecing together Maria's erratic behavior, the vague answers, the fear. It all made sense now. "I thought there was something off," Rachel muttered, her stomach knotting. "Do we notify the police? They've already been contacted. There's more." A report came in a couple of hours ago from a hospital 2 towns over. A baby, matching Michael's description, was abducted this morning. The police believe it's the same child. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. She glanced back toward Maria, who was still pacing near the window. Unaware that her secret was about to come crashing down around her, Rachel took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "We can't let her leave. She's dangerous." "Desperate," Dr. Jameson nodded. "Security is already on alert, but we need to keep her calm until the police get here." Rachel clenched the sheet of blood results in her hand, her pulse racing. She had to be smart about this. If Maria realized that the truth had been uncovered, she might do something reckless. There was no telling what she was capable of. Rachel couldn't afford to push her too hard now, but she also couldn't let her slip away. Steeling herself, Rachel approached Maria again, her voice as steady as she could make it. "Maria, I need you to come with me for a moment. We've got an update on Michael's condition and the doctor wants to talk to you privately." Maria hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "Is he okay?" Rachel forced a smile. "We're doing everything we can. Just come with me and we'll explain everything." For a tense moment, Maria seemed frozen, weighing her options. But then, with a curt nod, she followed Rachel toward a small consultation room off to the side of the ER. Rachel opened the door, gesturing for Maria to enter first. As Maria stepped inside, Rachel glanced back at the waiting area where hospital security discreetly hovered. They gave her a nod of acknowledgement. The police were on their way. Inside the consultation room, Rachel closed the door behind them, her heart pounding in her ears. Maria turned to face her, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. "What's going on?" Maria demanded, her voice sharp. Rachel met her gaze, feeling the weight of the next few minutes pressing down on her. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, not now. "We just need to talk, Maria, about Michael. And about who he really is." The air in the small consultation room was thick with tension, pressing in on Rachel's chest as she faced Maria. The sound of Maria's ragged breathing filled the space, loud and uneven. Each breath a struggle to maintain composure as the truth began to unravel. Rachel could feel her own pulse in her ears, the weight of the moment bearing down on her. Outside, the rain continued to fall in relentless sheets, the storm mirroring the chaos inside the hospital walls. "Maria," Rachel said, keeping her voice low, her tone gentle but firm. "We need to talk about what really happened tonight." Maria's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her knuckles white, and Rachel could see the tremble in her fingers. Her face was pale, drained of any remaining color, and her wide eyes were glossy with unshed tears. She was cornered now, like an animal trapped with no way out, and Rachel knew that one wrong word could send her spiraling. "I told you everything," Maria whispered, her voice trembling, but there was a sharp edge to her tone, as if she was clinging to her story with the last shreds of her strength. "He's my baby. Michael is mine." Rachel shook her head, her eyes soft with sympathy, but her words were unyielding. "Maria, we ran some tests. The blood tests showed that Michael can't be your biological son. His blood type doesn't match yours, and there's more." Before Rachel could finish, Maria's face contorted with anger and panic. She stepped back, pressing her spine against the cold wall, her hands shooting up as if to protect herself from the truth. No, that's not possible." Her voice was shrill, frantic. "There has to be a mistake. You don't know what you're talking about. He's mine. He has to be mine." Rachel took a step forward, careful to keep her distance but knowing she needed to keep Maria calm, to guide her through this storm before she lashed out in desperation. "Maria, listen to me. I'm not here to judge you, but I need you to be honest. The police have been notified. They've told us a baby was taken from another hospital earlier today. A baby that matches Michael's description." At the mention of the police, Maria's entire body tensed, her eyes widening with sheer terror. Her breathing became erratic, and her chest heaved as she struggled to control her panic. Rachel saw it the moment Maria realized she was trapped, the moment she knew there was no way out. The truth was closing in, and the only thing left was how she would handle it. "I didn't take him," Maria said, her voice barely audible, each word a breathless plea. "I didn't steal him. You have to believe me. I found him. I was outside the hospital and I saw someone leave him there. They just left him and all alone. I couldn't—" Rachel's heart pounded as she tried to make sense of Maria's frantic explanation. "You found him?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "And what do you mean? You saw someone abandon Michael?" Maria's eyes darted around the room, her movements jerky, as if she were trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She wiped her face with trembling hands, her fingers shaking so violently that she could barely control them. "Yes, I swear. There was a woman. I don't know who she was, but she left him on a bench outside the hospital. I thought maybe she couldn't take care of him. I didn't know what else to do, so I took him." Rachel's heart twisted. There was a strange, haunting sincerity in Maria's voice, a kind of desperation that was hard to fake. But this story made no sense. Why wouldn't Maria have gone straight to the authorities if she truly believed the baby had been abandoned? What was she hiding? "Maria," Rachel said, taking another careful step closer. "If you really found him, why didn't you call the police? Why didn't you take him to the hospital right away?" "I was scared." Maria's voice cracked, her eyes flooding with tears that spilled down her cheeks. "I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't mean to keep him, but then he started having trouble breathing and I panicked. I thought if I brought him here, they'd take him from me. I didn't want to lose him. I couldn't lose him." Rachel could see the desperation in Maria's eyes, the way she was clutching at her story, trying to hold on to something, anything that would keep her from losing the baby she had come to see as hers. But the truth was already slipping through her fingers, and Rachel could feel the weight of it pressing down on both of them. "Maria," Rachel said, her voice soft but firm, "you need to tell the police the truth. If you found Michael, they'll investigate. But right now, keeping this secret is only making things worse." Maria shook her head violently, her tears falling faster now, her face contorting with anguish. "No, you don't understand. You can't let them take him. He's all I have. I don't have anyone else. I just wanted to help him." Her voice broke and she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing into her hands, her entire body shaking with the force of her grief. Rachel's throat tightened, watching Maria unravel before her eyes. But there was nothing she could do to stop what was coming. The situation had spiraled far beyond anyone's control. As Rachel knelt down beside Maria, trying to offer some form of comfort, there was a knock at the door. Rachel's heart leapt into her throat, and she turned to see two uniformed police officers standing in the doorway, their faces grim. "Monsieur Sanchez," one of the officers said, stepping into the room, his voice low but commanding. "We need to speak with you about the baby you brought in tonight." Maria's entire body went rigid at the sound of the officer's voice. She lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes wild with terror. "No, please no," she whispered, backing away from them, her hands raised as if to ward off the inevitable. Rachel stood, moving between the officers and Maria, her heart pounding. "She's scared," she said quietly to the officers. "She thinks you're going to take the baby away." The officer nodded, his face softening slightly, but his tone remained firm. "We need her to cooperate. If there's been a misunderstanding, we'll figure it out, but she needs to come with us." Maria let out a strangled cry, her back pressed against the wall as if trying to disappear into it. "No, you don't understand. He's all I have." Her voice cracked with desperation, and Rachel could feel the tension in the room rising, the situation spiraling out of control. Rachel took a step toward Maria, speaking softly. "Maria, listen to me. You need to go with them. If what you're saying is true, they'll figure it out. But if you run, it's only going to make things worse. I promise you, they'll help you." But Maria wasn't listening. She was too far gone, consumed by panic and fear. Her eyes darted wildly between Rachel and the officers, and in one frantic motion, she pushed herself off the wall and bolted for the door. "Hey, Maria, no!" Rachel shouted, but it was too late. The officers moved swiftly, blocking Maria's path as she tried to escape, her cries echoing through the small room. One of them gently but firmly grabbed her arm, restraining her as she thrashed and sobbed, her pleas falling on deaf ears. "Please, please, don't take him away from me. He's mine. He's mine!" Maria screamed, her voice breaking as she fought against the officers. "Hold." Rachel watched in stunned silence, her heart aching at the sight of Maria's complete breakdown. She had seen many people in moments of crisis, but this was different. This was a woman who had lost everything, who had clung to the one thing she thought she could save, only to have it ripped away from her. As the officers led Maria out of the room, her sobs echoing down the hallway, Rachel stood frozen, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. She wanted to believe Maria's story, wanted to think that she had simply made a terrible, desperate mistake. But the evidence was too damning, the facts too clear. Rachel's thoughts were interrupted by a quiet voice behind her. "Rachel." She turned to see Dr. Jameson standing in the doorway, his face drawn with concern. "The police are taking her in for questioning. But there's something else you need to know." Rachel's stomach dropped. "What is it?" Dr. Jameson sighed, his eyes heavy with the weight of the news. "The real mother. She's been found. She's on her way here. She's been searching for her baby all day." Rachel's heart sank. The baby had a mother, a real mother who had been living a nightmare, not knowing where her child was, fearing the worst. And now, she was on her way to the hospital, completely unaware of the chaos that had unfolded. As the rain continued to beat against the windows, Rachel felt the weight of the night pressing down on her, the tangled threads of Maria's story unraveling into something far more complicated and tragic than she could have imagined. And in the quiet, dim room, as the sound of Maria's cries faded into the distance, Rachel knew one thing for certain. The storm was far from over. Rachel stood in the now empty consultation room, the weight of the night pressing down on her like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The chaos of the last few hours had taken its toll, and she felt drained, emotionally, physically, mentally. The cold fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, a dull hum that filled the silence left in the wake of Maria's anguished screams. The sound of footsteps in the hallway jarred her back to reality. She glanced at the clock, 3:45 a.m. The hospital was still, but beneath that calm surface was the crackling tension of what was to come. The real mother, Michael's mother, was on her way, and with her arrival would come the final unraveling of everything. Rachel's heart ached. Maria's story, no matter how flawed, was filled with the raw, desperate love of someone who had tried to cling to something they weren't meant to have. But that didn't make it right. A child had been stolen, and another mother had been living a nightmare for hours, wondering if her baby was even alive. Dr. Jameson's voice broke through her thoughts. "Rachel, are you okay?" She blinked, looking up to see him standing in the doorway, his expression tight with concern. His presence grounded her, and she forced herself to take a deep breath. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice softer than usual. "It's just a lot." Dr. Jameson nodded, understanding the weight she was carrying. "I know, we all feel it. But we need to prepare for what's next." Rachel swallowed, the tightness in her chest refusing to ease. "What do we know about the real mother?" He stepped into the room, holding a manila folder under his arm. "Her name is Amanda Pierce. She's from a town about an hour away. Apparently, she left her baby in the nursery at her local hospital, and when she came back to check on him, he was gone. The staff there raised the alarm immediately, but by the time they realized what had happened, Maria was already long gone." Rachel winced. She could only imagine the terror Amanda must have felt, coming back to an empty crib. Her worst nightmare realized. How did they lose track of him for so long? Dr. Jameson sighed. Hospitals can be chaotic, especially in maternity wards. From what we've gathered, Maria blended in with the visitors and somehow slipped away with the baby before anyone noticed. By the time the police were involved, she'd already brought Michael here. Rachel shook her head, anger and frustration swirling inside her. And now she's gone. Maria's been arrested, and Amanda's on her way here to take her baby back. But I can't stop thinking about Maria. What drove her to do something like this? Dr. Jameson leaned against the wall, rubbing his temples. It's hard to say. People who are that desperate often aren't thinking rationally. She must have seen an opportunity and taken it. Maybe she was struggling with her own loss, or maybe she saw Michael and thought she could fill some void in her life. Rachel's mind raced back to Maria's frantic words, her desperate pleas. "He's all I have. I don't have anyone else." Those words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of Maria's pain. But then there was Amanda, the real mother who had been living through her own private hell. Rachel had seen both sides now. One woman who had lost everything and taken drastic measures, and another who had everything taken from her, left to fear the worst. Both women, in their own way, were victims of a cruel twist of fate. "I should go check on Michael," Rachel murmured, her voice heavy with fatigue. "He's stable, but I don't know. This whole situation feels like it's barely holding together." Dr. Jameson nodded, his expression softening. "I go. I'll handle things on this end." Rachel offered him a grateful smile, though it didn't reach her eyes, and turned to leave the room. As she made her way down the sterile hospital hallway, her footsteps echoed softly, the sound swallowed by the thick quiet of the night. The trauma room where Michael lay was just ahead, the door slightly ajar, casting a thin line of light onto the polished floor. She paused at the door, peeking inside. The infant was swaddled in blankets, tubes and wires still connected to his tiny body. He was peaceful now, his small chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of sleep. The ventilator had been removed, and his breathing, though shallow, was no longer erratic. For the first time since he'd been brought in, he looked like he was no longer in danger. Rachel approached quietly, her heart swelling as she looked down at him. How could something so innocent be caught in the middle of such a terrible situation? Michael had no idea of the storm raging around him, the battle for his future. He was just a baby, helpless, vulnerable, and in need of protection. The door creaked behind her, and Rachel turned to see a nurse peeking in. "Is everything okay?" the nurse asked softly, glancing at the baby. Rachel nodded. "Yeah, he's doing better. I just needed to check on him." The nurse smiled and understanding. "The mother, Amanda Pierce, she's on her way. Should be here in about half an hour." Rachel's stomach twisted. "Thanks," she whispered, turning back to Michael. "Half an hour? In 30 minutes, the woman who had been waiting in agony would be here. And Maria?" Rachel shuddered at the thought of what would happen to her now. Prison, a psychiatric evaluation? She didn't know, but whatever came next, Maria's life was over as she knew it. Time moved slowly after that. Rachel stood by Michael's bedside, lost in thought, until the sound of rushed footsteps in the hallway snapped her out of her reverie. She stepped back as the door opened. Amanda Pierce entered the room, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with desperation and fear. She moved with the jerky, frantic energy of someone who had been on edge for hours, unable to breathe, unable to think of anything other than her missing child. Rachel's heart clenched as she watched the woman approach the crib, her hand trembling as she reached for Michael. Amanda's eyes filled with tears, her lips quivering as she looked down at her baby. Michael," she whispered, her voice breaking as her fingers gently touched his tiny cheek. "Oh my God, Michael." Rachel stepped back, giving Amanda space, watching as the woman cradled her baby with the kind of fierce, protective love that only a mother could feel. The scene was raw, emotional, and Rachel felt her own eyes prick with tears. Amanda's sobs filled the room as she held her son close, murmuring words of love and relief into his soft hair. For a moment, everything else disappeared. Maria's desperate cries, the chaos of the last few hours. It was just a mother reunited with her child, the bond between them stronger than anything Rachel had ever seen. But as Amanda rocked her baby gently, Rachel couldn't help but think of Maria, alone in a police car, her world shattered. It wasn't right. None of it was right. One woman had her life restored, but another's had been torn apart. And the complexity of the situation left Rachel feeling hollow. Dr. Jameson appeared in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. He caught Rachel's eye and gave her a small nod, as if to say, "It's over now. The baby is safe." But Rachel didn't feel relief. Instead, she felt the weight of the night pressing down on her, the lingering sadness for what had been lost. Yes, Michael was safe, but the scars of this night would last a lifetime. For Amanda, for Maria, for everyone. As Rachel left the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that while the storm had passed, the damage it left behind would be felt for a long time. She knew that neither woman would ever be the same again, and neither would she. The hospital's hallways were eerily quiet as Rachel made her way back to the nurse's station, the events of the last few hours playing over and over in her mind. The tension that had filled the air seemed to have dissipated now that Michael had been reunited with his mother, Amanda. But for Rachel, the unease lingered. The weight of what had transpired still clung to her like a shadow she couldn't shake. Linda was waiting for her at the station, a cup of coffee in hand. She gave Rachel a look that was both knowing and sympathetic. "You look like you've been through hell," she said softly, handing Rachel the cup. Rachel took it, grateful for the warmth in her hands, but she couldn't bring herself to smile. "It feels like it," she admitted, sinking into the chair beside Linda. Her whole body felt heavy, as if she were carrying the emotional weight of both Maria and Amanda. "Did the mother get here?" Linda asked, concern lacing her voice. Rachel nodded, taking a sip of the coffee, though it did little to ease the knot in her stomach. "She's with Michael now." It was emotional. "I can't even imagine what she's been through. And Maria?" Linda's voice was softer now, a note of unease creeping in. "What happens to her?" Rachel shook her head, exhaling a long, tired breath. "And she's with the police. They'll figure it out, but I don't know what's going to happen to her. Part of me thinks she didn't mean any harm, but then she took someone else's baby. How do you come back from that?" Linda looked down at her hands, fidgeting with a pen. "It's hard to say. People do crazy things when they're desperate. Maybe she thought she was helping, or maybe she was trying to fill a hole in her own life. Either way, she crossed a line that can't be uncrossed." Rachel nodded slowly, her thoughts returning to Maria's anguished face, her broken sobs as the truth closed in on her. "He's all I have." Those words haunted Rachel, echoing in her mind like a sad refrain. What had Maria been running from? What pain had driven her to such a desperate act? "You know what's crazy?" Rachel said after a long pause. "I can't stop thinking about her, about Maria. I know she did something terrible, but I keep wondering, what if she hadn't found Michael? What if no one had?" Linda sighed. "It's hard not to feel for her, but we can't forget Amanda either. That woman almost lost her baby. They're both victims in a way." Rachel leaned back in her chair, staring up at the ceiling. "Yeah, they are. And Michael, he's the one caught in the middle of all this." The night shift dragged on, the weight of the hours pressing on Rachel's shoulders as she moved through the routine tasks, her mind never far from what had happened. Eventually, as dawn approached, the emergency room began to stir with new arrivals, the bustle of morning life pushing the events of the night into the background. But for Rachel, The weight of what had happened lingered like a stain she couldn't wash away. It wasn't until just after sunrise that Rachel found herself heading out to the hospital's small courtyard for a moment of quiet. The air was crisp, the early morning sun breaking through the clouds, casting a soft golden glow over the damp ground. The rain had stopped, but the remnants of the storm still clung to the leaves and flowers, droplets catching the light like tiny diamonds. She sat on a bench, breathing in the cool air, trying to shake the heaviness that had settled in her chest. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the image of Maria's tear-streaked face, or Amanda's overwhelming relief as she held her baby again. Rachel was lost in thought when she heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Amanda standing a few feet away, cradling Michael in her arms. The sight of them made Rachel's heart ache, a bittersweet mix of joy and sorrow. "Can I sit?" Amanda asked softly, her voice tinged with exhaustion. Rachel nodded, gesturing to the spot beside her. "Of course." Amanda sat down carefully, adjusting the baby in her arms. Michael was sleeping peacefully, his tiny fists curled up under his chin. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything that had happened. "I don't know how to thank you," Amanda said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved him. If it weren't for you, I don't know where he'd be." Rachel shook her head, her throat tightening. "I just did my job, Amanda. You don't have to thank me." But Amanda turned to her, her eyes filling with tears. No, you don't understand. I've been living a nightmare for the last 24 hours. I thought I'd never see him again." She looked down at Michael, her hand gently stroking his soft hair. And when I saw that crib empty, it was like the world just stopped. And then, when they told me they'd found him here, her voice cracked, and she wiped at her eyes, struggling to keep her composure. "I thought I'd lost him forever." Rachel's chest tightened, the enormity of what Amanda had been through settling in her bones. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that," Rachel said softly. "I can't imagine how terrifying that must have been." Amanda nodded, her eyes distant as she rocked Michael gently in her arms. "I keep thinking about her," she said after a long pause. "The woman who took him, Maria, why did she do it? What was she thinking?" Rachel bit her lip, unsure of how to answer. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I think she was desperate. Lost, maybe. It doesn't make it right, but I don't think she meant to hurt anyone." Amanda was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on Michael. "It's hard to hate her," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should hate her for what she did. But all I can think about is, what if she hadn't brought him here? What if she'd just left him somewhere? He might have died." Rachel swallowed hard, her emotions swirling in a confusing mix of sadness, anger, and compassion. "You're right," she said softly. "But she made the wrong choice. She should have called for help the moment she found him." Amanda nodded slowly, her eyes brimming with tears again. "I know, but still, part of me feels like she saved him too. In her own twisted way, she kept him safe." They sat in silence for a long time after that, the sounds of the hospital fading into the background as the sun rose higher in the sky. Amanda cradled her son, and Rachel sat beside her, feeling the weight of the night begin to lift, if only just a little. Eventually, Amanda stood, adjusting Michael in her arms. "I thank you again," she said, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. "For everything," Rachel smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "You take care of him, Amanda. He's a lucky little boy." Amanda nodded, her lips trembling with the weight of her emotions. Then, with one last look at Rachel, she turned and walked away, disappearing down the hallway with her baby safely in her arms. Rachel sat there for a while longer, letting the quiet settle around her. The storm had passed, but its aftermath lingered, leaving behind the scars of what had been lost and found in the span of a single night. As the morning sun warmed her face, Rachel closed her eyes and took a deep breath, knowing that this night, this story, would stay with her for a long time. And though the baby had been saved, the echoes of Maria's cries would never fully leave her.
Homeless man returns, finds a lost wallet, and decides to return it. When he finds out who the owner was, he can't hold back his tears. Ethan Harper, a homeless man in his late 30s, sat on a worn bench in Riverside Park, his thin frame huddled against the brisk autumn wind. His clothes were layered and mismatched, a testament to the years he'd spent living on the streets. Despite his dire circumstances, Ethan had a quiet dignity about him. His eyes, a striking shade of green, still held a flicker of hope. On that particular morning, the city hummed around him. Commuters rushed by, their faces buried in scarves, hands clutching takeaway coffee cups. Ethan watched as they passed, occasionally offering a polite "good morning," though few responded. As he prepared to leave the park in search of a warm shelter, his attention was caught by a small, leather wallet lying just a few feet away on the pathway. It was sleek and well-crafted, clearly belonging to someone with wealth. Instinctively, Ethan picked it up, turning it over in his hands. Opening it, he found a driver's license, several credit cards, and a stack of crisp bills. The name on the ID read Jonathan Radcliffe. The face that accompanied the name was familiar. Jonathan was one of the city's most successful real estate moguls, a man whose face adorned billboards advertising luxury apartments. Ethan's breath caught. For a moment, the weight of temptation pressed on him. The money inside could feed him for weeks, even months if spent wisely. But the thought of using it felt wrong. Ethan's mother had always told him, "The choices we make when no one is looking define who we are." Resolute, he decided to return the wallet. Tucking it carefully into his pocket, he made his way to the nearest library to search for an address or contact information. The internet, a rare luxury in his life, provided the details he needed. Jonathan Radcliffe's office was in a high-rise building on Madison Avenue. Hours later, Ethan found himself standing at the imposing entrance of Radcliffe Enterprises. The glass doors reflected his disheveled appearance, and for a moment, he hesitated. Would they even let him in? Gathering his courage, he pushed the door open and approached the reception desk. The receptionist, a poised woman in a tailored suit, looked up and blinked in surprise. "Can I help you?" "I found Mr. Radcliffe's wallet," Ethan said, pulling it out of his pocket. "I'm here to return it." Her skepticism was evident, but she nodded. "One moment, please." Picking up the phone, she made a call. A few minutes later, a man in his 50s appeared. It was Jonathan Radcliffe himself, his presence commanding and sharp. "You found my wallet?" he asked, studying Ethan. "Yes, sir. It was in Riverside Park," Ethan replied, handing it over. Jonathan opened it, confirming everything was intact. "I don't know what to say," he began, clearly moved. "Most people wouldn't have done this. I just thought it was the right thing to do," Ethan said simply. Jonathan's gaze softened. "What's your name?" "Ethan Harper." Jonathan studied him for a moment, then said, "Ethan, why don't you come upstairs? I'd like to talk to you." Ethan hesitated but eventually agreed, following Jonathan to the upper floors of the building. The office was breathtaking, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Jonathan gestured for Ethan to sit. "Tell me," Jonathan began, "what's your story?" Ethan shared his tale of hardship, how he lost his job after his father's prolonged illness drained their savings, how a string of bad luck had left him on the streets. He didn't embellish or seek pity. He simply spoke his truth. Jonathan listened intently. When Ethan finished, he leaned back in his chair, visibly moved. "You remind me of someone," Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion. "My younger brother. He was just like you, kind and selfless, even when life was cruel to him." Ethan remained silent, unsure of what to say. Jonathan stood abruptly. "Ethan, I owe you more than gratitude for returning my wallet. You've reminded me of something important." His voice trembled slightly. "Wait here." When Jonathan returned, he held a small envelope and a set of keys. "In this envelope is a check to help you get back on your feet. And these keys, they're to a studio apartment I own downtown. It's empty, and I want you to stay there until you can stand on your own." Ethan was stunned. "I can't accept this." "Yes, you can," Jonathan insisted. "You've earned it, not just by your actions today, but by the integrity you've shown in your life. This isn't charity. It's an opportunity. Ethan's eyes filled with tears as he accepted the envelope and keys. Thank you, he whispered. That night, Ethan stood in his new apartment, overwhelmed by gratitude. The space was small but warm, with a bed, a kitchenette, and a view of the city skyline. For the first time in years, he felt hope take root. As he settled in, a knock came at the door. Opening it, Ethan was shocked to see Jonathan standing there, holding a framed photograph. This was my brother, Jonathan said, handing it to him. The resemblance was uncanny. Ethan stared at the photo, his tears falling freely. I think I was meant to find your wallet, he said, his voice trembling. Jonathan smiled. Maybe you were. Ethan woke up in the unfamiliar warmth of a real bed, sunlight streaming through the sheer curtains. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. The soft mattress beneath him and the quiet hum of the city far removed from the cold bench he'd grown accustomed to. But as he glanced at the set of keys on the bedside table, reality settled in. This was his new beginning. The studio apartment was small but cozy, with clean white walls and modest furnishings. Ethan's gaze fell on the framed photo Jonathan had given him the previous evening. The young man in the photo, Jonathan's brother, had a striking resemblance to himself. The shared name only deepened the uncanny connection. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. Later that day, Jonathan called. Ethan, how are you settling in? Better than I could have hoped for, Ethan replied honestly. I don't even know how to thank you. You already did, Jonathan said. Now I want to help you take the next step. Are you ready to start working? Yes, Ethan said without hesitation. Good. I own several properties in the city. There's a position open as a maintenance assistant in one of the buildings. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and it comes with health benefits. That sounds perfect, Ethan said, gratitude flooding his voice. Great. I'll send someone to pick you up tomorrow morning. The next morning, Ethan found himself at the Radcliffe Tower, a historic building in the heart of the city. Its red brick facade stood proudly amidst modern skyscrapers, a symbol of a bygone era. The property manager, a stern but fair woman named Linda, gave Ethan a tour of the building and outlined his responsibilities. Your job is straightforward, she said. Keep the building in shape, repairs, cleaning common areas, making sure the tenants are happy. Think you can handle it? Yes, ma'am, Ethan said, eager to prove himself. The tenants were a mix of professionals, retirees, and young families. Ethan's first tasks were simple: fixing a leaking faucet, changing a flickering hallway light, and clearing debris from a storage area in the basement. It was in the basement that Ethan stumbled upon something curious: a dusty stack of boxes marked with Jonathan's family crest. Inside were old documents, photos, and personal belongings. Among them, Ethan found a leather-bound journal with the name Ethan Radcliffe embossed on the cover. Hesitating for only a moment, he opened it. The entries were fragmented, written in hurried, scrawled handwriting. They spoke of dreams unfulfilled, struggles with identity, and a longing to escape the shadow of an older sibling. July 12, 1998. Jonathan always knows what to say, how to act, how to succeed. But what about me? I feel like I'm drowning in expectations. Maybe it's better if I just disappear. The pain in the words resonated deeply with Ethan. His own life had been a series of unmet expectations, though his circumstances were vastly different. One entry, dated just weeks before Ethan Radcliffe's death, stood out. September 4th, 1998. I dreamt of starting over, of being free from it all. Maybe in another life, I could be the person I was meant to be. That evening, Ethan sat on the floor of his apartment, the journal in his hands. His heart ached for a man he'd never met, a man who shared his name and perhaps even some of his struggles. When Jonathan called to check in, Ethan hesitated before bringing up the journal. I found something today. Your brother's journal. There was a long pause on the other end. I thought I lost that years ago, Jonathan said quietly. I didn't mean to pry, but he wrote about wanting to start over, about feeling lost, Jonathan's voice cracked slightly as he responded. Ethan was different, sensitive. I always wanted to help him, but I think I pushed too hard, tried to mold him into someone he wasn't. When he died, I couldn't forgive myself. You couldn't have known, Ethan said gently. Sometimes people hide their pain too well. Jonathan sighed. Maybe, but finding you, it feels like a second chance. Like I can do something right this time. Part 3/10. The ripple effect. Ethan couldn't shake the words from the note. To the Ethan who finds this, may your journey lead you where mine could not. It was as if Ethan Radcliffe had left a message just for him, bridging a gap between lives separated by decades. Questions swirled in his mind. Was he meant to find this? Was this a coincidence? Or something more profound? The following days at the Radcliffe Tower brought Ethan a sense of routine. The job was demanding, but the physical labor gave him clarity. He found small joys in the work, fixing things, restoring order. Tenants began to notice his dedication, offering kind words and occasional coffee cups left on his workbench. Among the residents, a widowed retiree named Mrs. Beatrice Lane stood out. She was a sharp, witty woman with a keen eye for people's souls. "You've got a kind heart, young man," she said one afternoon as Ethan fixed her squeaky cabinet door. "Not many would have taken the hard road you've walked. I can see it in your eyes. You've known struggle." Ethan smiled faintly. "Struggle teaches you a lot. Mostly about what you don't want to become." Her wrinkled face softened. "That's wisdom, not struggle." Speaking. One evening, after a particularly long day, Ethan received an unexpected visit. Jonathan had stopped by the tower, his usual composed demeanor tinged with hesitation. "I wanted to see how you were doing," Jonathan said, stepping into the maintenance office. Ethan offered him a chair. "Better than I have in years," he admitted. I think I'm finally finding my place." Jonathan nodded. "That's good. But I've been thinking about what you said, the note in Ethan's journal. I can't get it out of my head." "I haven't either," Ethan replied. "It feels intentional, like he knew someone would find it." Jonathan leaned forward, his expression pensive. "I've always believed we leave ripples behind. Actions, words, they carry farther than we ever imagine. Maybe this is one of his ripples, reaching you." Ethan hesitated, then said, "Do you believe in second chances?" Jonathan's gaze grew distant. "I think I have to. Otherwise, what's all this for?" That night, Ethan returned to the journal, poring over its pages for any clues about the man who had written them. One passage caught his attention. August 15th, 1998. "There's a place I go when the world is too loud. A hidden spot in the city where it feels like time stops. If I ever get lost, that's where I'll find myself again." The description was vague, but Ethan felt compelled to find this place. The next day, during a break, he asked Mrs. Lane about quiet spots in the city. "There are plenty," she said, "but not all of them are hidden. Try the old bell tower near St. Vincent's Chapel. It's one of those places no one thinks to look anymore." Ethan thanked her and, after work, headed to the chapel. The bell tower was indeed tucked away, its once grand structure now weathered and overgrown with ivy. Climbing its narrow staircase, Ethan reached the top and gasped. The view was breathtaking. An open sky stretched above the city, its noise muted by the height. Sitting on a ledge was a carved inscription, "Let the world fall silent, so your heart can speak." Ethan sat there for hours, the city lights twinkling below. It was easy to imagine Ethan Radcliffe coming here, seeking solace. The connection felt palpable, as if he could almost hear the whispers of the past. When he finally descended the tower, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever this journey was, it wasn't just about finding himself. It was about honoring the paths of those who came before him. Ethan stared at the photograph in his trembling hands. The image of a younger Jonathan and Ethan Radcliffe exuded warmth and camaraderie, but the cryptic message on the back unsettled him. "Find the truth and set it free." Who had left the photo, and why? His mind raced as he considered the possibilities. Was it someone from Jonathan's past? A tenant at the tower? Or was it something more intangible? a force guiding him toward answers he hadn't yet known to seek. He decided to call Jonathan. "Jonathan, I found something. Someone slipped a photo under my door." Jonathan's voice grew serious. "A photo? Of what?" "It's you and your brother. There's a message on the back. Find the truth and set it free. Does that mean anything to you?" A long silence followed before Jonathan spoke, his tone heavy. "Ethan, I think it's time we talked about what really happened to my brother." The next day, Jonathan invited Ethan to his private office, a space filled with books, awards, and family photos. Jonathan sat behind his mahogany desk, his usual confidence replaced with a palpable vulnerability. "My brother, Ethan, was complicated," he began. "He was brilliant, creative, empathetic, full of potential, but he always felt like he didn't belong. Our family was demanding, and I think he felt suffocated under the weight of expectations." Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, sighing deeply. "The night he died, we argued. He wanted to leave the family business, start fresh somewhere else. I thought he was being reckless, that he was throwing away everything we'd worked for. I said things I regret. Harsh things." Ethan listened intently, his chest tightening with empathy. "I didn't realize how much he was hurting. Later that night, I got a call. They found his car by the river. He'd driven off the bridge." Jonathan's voice broke. "They said it was an accident, but I've always wondered if it was something more." The weight of Jonathan's confession hung heavily in the air. Ethan could see the pain etched in every line of his face, the guilt he'd carried for years. "I've spent my life trying to make up for it," Jonathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Building this empire, helping others. It's all been an attempt to fill the void he left behind." Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady. "Maybe this is your chance to heal. Whatever truth your brother wanted to share, maybe it's still out there." That evening, Ethan returned to the journal, combing through its pages for anything he might have missed. One entry stood out. August 20th, 1998. "There are things I've never told anyone. Secrets that weigh on me like anchors. I wrote them down once, locked them away. Maybe someday someone will find them. Maybe that's how I'll be heard." The words sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Could Ethan Radcliffe have left behind something more? A letter, a message, a final testament? He thought of the photograph and the bell tower. Could these be part of a larger puzzle? The next day, Ethan returned to St. Vincent's Chapel. He climbed the bell tower again, this time examining every corner of the space. Behind a loose brick near the inscription, he discovered a small, weathered box. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Carefully, Ethan unfolded it to reveal a letter. "To whoever finds this, I don't know if my voice will ever reach the ones I love, but I need to try. There are truths I've hidden for fear of disappointing my family, of being seen as weak. But hiding them has only made the weight unbearable." The letter continued, detailing Ethan Radcliffe's struggles with mental health, his feelings of isolation, and his longing to break free from the expectations placed upon him. "Jonathan, if you ever read this, please know I never blamed you. You pushed me because you believed in me, and I couldn't bear to tell you how much I was struggling. I love you, and I hope one day you'll forgive yourself." Tears blurred Ethan's vision as he read the final lines. "To the one who carries my name, find your own path. Live the life I couldn't." Ethan descended the bell tower carefully, his mind racing. The discovery of Ethan Radcliffe's letter had left him overwhelmed with emotions. Sorrow for a life lost too soon, gratitude for the wisdom left behind, and a determination to honor the man's wishes. As he reached the street, the city's noise snapped him back to the present. He resolved to share the letter with Jonathan, but a lingering unease held him back. It wasn't just the contents of the letter. It was the feeling he'd had in the tower being watched. That evening, Jonathan visited Ethan's apartment. The businessman seemed more composed than during their last conversation, though a shadow still hung over his demeanor. Ethan handed him the letter without a word. Jonathan read it slowly, his expression shifting from curiosity to grief, then to something Ethan couldn't quite name. When he finished, He folded the letter carefully and held it in his lap. "I've spent 25 years trying to understand him," Jonathan said, his voice thick. "And now, here he is speaking to me from the past. He didn't blame me." "No, he didn't," Ethan replied. "But he wanted you to know what he couldn't say back then." Jonathan nodded, his eyes glistening. "This changes everything. I've been living as if I owed him a debt I could never repay. Maybe now I can let go of that guilt." Ethan hesitated. "There's something else," he said, recounting his experience in the tower and the mysterious figure he'd seen. Jonathan frowned. "A figure? Are you sure?" "I know it sounds strange," Ethan admitted, "but I can't shake the feeling that someone is following this. Watching us." Jonathan looked thoughtful. "I don't believe in coincidences, Ethan. Whoever or whatever left that photo and message wanted you to find the truth. Maybe they aren't done yet." The following day, Ethan returned to work at the Radcliffe Tower. Life at the building seemed unchanged, though his new perspective gave him a greater appreciation for the tenants and their lives. Mrs. Lane stopped him in the hallway. "You seem different today," she observed. "I found something I wasn't expecting," Ethan said vaguely. She tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. "Be careful, young man. Digging up the past can uncover things you might not want to see." Ethan smiled faintly. "Sometimes it's the only way to move forward." That night, Ethan sat in his apartment, rereading Ethan Radcliffe's letter. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. The journal, the letter, the photo all seemed like pieces of a larger puzzle. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. When he opened it, no one was there. Instead, an envelope lay on the floor. Inside was a single page, torn from a book, with a handwritten note scrawled across it. "The Radcliffe family legacy isn't what it seems. Look deeper." At the bottom of the page was an address. An old Radcliffe estate on the outskirts of the city, long abandoned. Ethan called Jonathan immediately. "I found another message. It has an address, an old Radcliffe property. Do you know anything about it?" Jonathan was silent for a moment. "Yes, it was our summer house when we were kids. My parents sold it after Ethan died. I haven't been back since." "Then it's where we need to go," Ethan said. Jonathan hesitated. "Are you sure about this? Some things are better left buried." "I think your brother wanted us to find this," Ethan said firmly. "Whatever's there, it's part of the truth he wanted to set free." The air around the Radcliffe summer house was heavy with the scent of decay and nostalgia. Jonathan hesitated on the overgrown pathway, his hands buried in his coat pockets as he gazed at the dilapidated structure. Ethan could see the hesitation in his eyes. "We don't have to do this if you're not ready," Ethan offered. Jonathan shook his head. "No, it's time. Let's go." The front door swung open with an eerie groan as they stepped inside. Dust floated in the beams of sunlight that pierced through cracks in the boarded-up windows. The air was stale, the silence oppressive. "Everything looks smaller than I remember," Jonathan said, his voice echoing faintly. The main hall was lined with faded portraits of Radcliffe ancestors, their stern faces seemingly watching as the pair ventured deeper into the house. A grand staircase dominated the center of the space, its banister chipped and warped with age. The search began systematically. Room by room, they combed through the remains of the past. Broken furniture, forgotten trinkets, and scattered papers filled the spaces, but nothing seemed significant. In what used to be the library, Jonathan paused before a bookshelf. This was his favorite room, he said softly. He'd sit here for hours, reading anything he could get his hands on. Ethan ran his fingers along the dusty spines of the books. One caught his eye. It was slightly askew, its binding newer than the others. When he pulled it, the shelf shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small metal box. Jonathan took a shaky breath as Ethan placed the box on a nearby table and opened it. Inside were several items. A photograph of Ethan Radcliffe as a boy, smiling in front of the summer house. A worn wristwatch, its hands frozen in time. A bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Jonathan untied the ribbon with trembling hands and began reading. The letters were addressed to him, written in Ethan Radcliffe's familiar handwriting. Dear Jonathan, if you're reading this, it means you've finally found me. I wish I could have said these things to you in person, but I never had the courage. You were always so strong, so certain of yourself, and I felt like I could never measure up. But it wasn't your fault, it was mine. I let fear and doubt consume me. The letters went on to detail Ethan's struggles, his feelings of being overshadowed, and his dreams of forging his own path. There's something you need to know, something I couldn't tell you before. Our family, it wasn't as perfect as it seemed. I found documents, papers that explain things I never understood as a child. If you want the whole truth, look beneath the floorboards in Father's study. Jonathan's face turned pale. The study, he murmured. It's at the back of the house. Together, they made their way to the room. Unlike the rest of the house, the study seemed relatively untouched. The furniture was intact, though draped in cobwebs. The large oak desk stood in the center, its surface cluttered with yellowed papers and an old inkwell. Ethan knelt on the floor, feeling along the edges of the floorboards. In one corner, he found a loose plank. With Jonathan's help, he pried it open to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside were stacks of documents tied with twine. Jonathan picked up the first bundle, his eyes widening as he scanned the pages. These are financial records, donations to political campaigns, offshore accounts. His voice faltered. This isn't just business. These are bribes, cover-ups. Ethan's brow furrowed. Your father. Jonathan nodded grimly. He always prided himself on the family's reputation, on being a pillar of the community. But this could ruin everything he stood for. Among the papers was a final note, written in Ethan Radcliffe's handwriting. Jonathan, I found these after Father died. I didn't know what to do. I thought about destroying them, but I couldn't. The truth is ugly, but it's still the truth. Do what you think is right. I trust you. Jonathan sank into a chair, the weight of the revelations pressing down on him. All this time, I thought I was honoring his memory by protecting the Radcliffe name. But he wanted me to expose the truth. Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. Maybe that's the redemption he was looking for. For both of you. Jonathan looked up, determination hardening his features. You're right. It's time to set it free. Ethan traced his fingers over the symbol carved into the underside of the desk. It was a swirling, intricate design that seemed out of place amidst the study's otherwise traditional decor. I've seen this before, he murmured, recalling the same mark faintly etched into the letter he had found in the bell tower. Jonathan leaned in for a closer look. It's not familiar to me. Could it have been something my brother left behind? Maybe, Ethan replied, though the symbol seemed too deliberate to be a mere doodle. It felt significant, a clue pointing to something deeper. Let's take a photograph of it, Jonathan suggested. We can research it later. Ethan nodded, but an unsettling feeling crept over him. As they packed the documents and the metal box, the house seemed to grow colder, its silence heavier. Back at Ethan's apartment, they spread the contents of the hidden compartment across the table. Jonathan sifted through the documents while Ethan examined the photograph of the symbol. We should focus on two things, Ethan said. First, what to do with these documents. Second, figuring out what this symbol means. Jonathan nodded. Exposing these records could damage the reputation of Radcliffe Enterprises, but it could also bring justice to people who were wronged by our father's dealings. Then it's worth the risk, Ethan said firmly. Later that evening, Ethan sat alone, the image of the symbol still fresh in his mind. He pulled out Ethan Radcliffe's journal, flipping through its pages. Near the end, he noticed a small sketch, nearly invisible against the worn paper. The same symbol. Beneath it, a single phrase was written. The place where it all began. Ethan's heart quickened. What had begun and where? The next morning, Ethan shared his discovery with Jonathan. The place where it all began, Jonathan repeated, pacing the room. He could have meant so many things. The house, the tower, even our childhood home. I don't think it's literal, Ethan said. It feels like he's pointing us towards something tied to the symbol. Something bigger. Jonathan stopped pacing, his expression clouded. There was one place Ethan always mentioned when we were kids. Park near our first home. He called it his secret garden. Maybe that's what he meant. The park, nestled on the outskirts of the city, was overgrown and neglected. Vines strangled rusted swings, and wildflowers sprouted in what had once been a well-tended garden. Jonathan and Ethan wandered through the park, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path. This was his favorite spot, Jonathan said, stopping near an old gazebo. He'd sit here for hours, sketching or writing. Ethan examined the gazebo, noting its faded wood and peeling paint. Beneath one of the benches, he found something etched into the wood, the same swirling symbol. "This has to be it," Ethan said. Jonathan joined him, crouching to inspect the mark. If this was his secret garden, he might have hidden something here. They searched the gazebo and the surrounding area. Beneath a loose stone, they found a small metal cylinder. Inside was a roll of paper. Jonathan carefully unrolled it, revealing a map of the city. The map was marked with several locations, each indicated by the swirling symbol. "These places, they're all connected to our family," Jonathan said, pointing to the sites. "What do they mean?" Ethan asked. "I don't know," Jonathan admitted. "But if my brother went to this much trouble to mark them, they must be important." The figure's abrupt departure left Ethan and Jonathan shaken. For a long moment, they stood frozen in the shadow of the old gazebo, the mysterious map clenched in Jonathan's hands. "Who was that?" Ethan whispered, his voice tinged with unease. Jonathan scanned the park, his expression dark. "I don't know, but someone knows we're looking for answers, and they're watching us." Ethan's grip tightened on the map. "Then we don't stop. Whatever your brother left behind, someone doesn't want us to find it." The next step was clear. They had to investigate the locations marked on the map. After a night of restless sleep, Ethan and Jonathan set out early the following morning. The first location was a disused factory on the city's outskirts. The building loomed over the pair like a forgotten giant, its windows shattered and its walls scrawled with graffiti. "This used to be one of my father's properties," Jonathan explained as they made their way inside. The factory's interior was a maze of rusted machinery and crumbling walls. It seemed devoid of clues until Ethan noticed a pattern scratched into the floor near the back. The swirling symbol. "Here," he called. Jonathan crouched beside him. Beneath the symbol, they found a hidden compartment. Inside was an envelope containing a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph showed a group of men, including Jonathan and Ethan's father. The note read, "The truth hides in plain sight. Trust only those who seek it." The second location was an old theater downtown. Once a beacon of art and culture, it now stood abandoned, its grand marquee covered in grime. As they explored the stage and dressing rooms, Ethan noticed another faint carving of the swirling symbol, this time on the back of a broken mirror. Behind the mirror was a small box containing several keys and a cryptic set of coordinates. "What are these for?" Ethan asked, holding up the keys. Jonathan examined them closely. "I recognize these, they're for safety deposit boxes. My father used them to store important documents." Ethan frowned. "So the next clue might not be a place. Could be whatever's in those boxes." Returning to the city, they visited the bank listed on the coordinates. After some paperwork and security checks, they accessed a deposit box under Jonathan's father's name. Inside was a ledger filled with detailed records of payments, transactions, and connections to powerful figures across the city. Jonathan's face hardened as he flipped through the pages. This is a record of everything. Bribes, kickbacks, illegal deals. If this got out, it could bring down some of the most influential people in the city." Ethan placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "This is what your brother wanted you to find. He knew the truth was bigger than just your family." As they left the bank, the weight of their discovery was heavy. But the shadows that had followed them weren't far behind. That evening, back at Ethan's apartment, they laid out everything they had found. The map, the photograph, the letters, and the ledger. Each piece seemed connected, yet the picture was still incomplete. Ethan stared at the ledger. "If we're going to expose this, we need to be careful. Whoever's been following us isn't going to let this go without a fight. Jonathan nodded grimly. We'll need help. I know a journalist, someone I can trust. She'll know how to handle this. Ethan stared at the cryptic message on his phone, his resolve hardening. Whoever was trying to stop them had underestimated his determination. Jonathan. Someone just sent me a warning to back off. Jonathan frowned. They're getting desperate. That means we're close. Deciding not to be deterred, they pressed forward with their plan to involve the journalist Jonathan trusted, a woman named Catherine Doyle. A seasoned investigative reporter with a reputation for fearlessness, Catherine had spent years exposing corruption in the city's elite. When they met her at a discreet cafe the following morning, Catherine listened carefully as Jonathan explained their findings. This ledger alone could make waves, she said, flipping through the pages. But if we want real accountability, we need to link these records to current actions and individuals. This is only part of the picture. Jonathan nodded. There's more, Catherine. My brother left clues pointing us to hidden truths about our father's dealings. We've followed them this far, but we're still piecing it all together. Ethan added, we found marked locations on a map he left, and each one has revealed something significant. There might be more we haven't uncovered yet. Catherine's sharp eyes lit up with interest. Then let's keep digging. But we'll need to move carefully. If someone's already threatening you, it's because you're stepping on powerful toes. Their next move was to visit the remaining locations on the map, hoping to uncover the final pieces of the puzzle. The third site was an old chapel on the outskirts of the city, its once vibrant stained glass windows now faded and cracked. Inside, they found a small altar with the swirling symbol carved into its side. Beneath it was another hidden compartment containing a stack of letters. The letters were correspondence between Jonathan's father and a network of business associates, detailing plans to manipulate markets, exploit vulnerable communities, and silence dissent. This is it, Catherine said, scanning the documents. This ties the ledger to a larger conspiracy. With this, we can prove intent and collaboration. The final location on the map was a derelict warehouse near the waterfront. The air was damp, and the structure groaned under its own weight as they navigated through it. Amidst the debris, they discovered a sealed safe buried beneath a collapsed section of flooring. It took effort and tools to pry it open, but inside was an object that made Jonathan freeze. An ornate locket. Ethan noticed Jonathan's reaction. What is it? Jonathan opened the locket to reveal two photographs, one of himself and the other of his brother. This was Ethan's. He always wore it when we were kids. Inside the locket was also a small, folded note. The truth will cost you, but lies cost more. Use this wisely. Returning to Catherine's office, the trio pieced together their findings. The full scope of the conspiracy became clear. A web of corruption spanning decades, orchestrated by Jonathan's father and his associates to maintain power and control at any cost. We have enough here to publish a bombshell story, Catherine said. But we'll need to verify everything to make it airtight. Jonathan exhaled deeply. This will destroy my father's legacy. It'll bring down powerful people. But it'll also honor my brother's memory. Ethan placed a hand on Jonathan's shoulder. It's the right thing to do. Ethan wanted this truth to come out. You're giving him the voice he never had. Over the next week, Catherine worked tirelessly to corroborate the evidence. Ethan and Jonathan stayed vigilant, knowing the risks of retaliation. The anonymous threats continued, but they refused to back down. When Catherine's story finally went live, it was explosive. News outlets picked up the revelations, and the city was rocked by the scandal. Several prominent figures were forced to resign, and investigations into criminal charges began. In the aftermath, Jonathan stood on the balcony of his office, looking out over the city. Ethan joined him, the air between them filled with quiet reflection. I feel like I can finally breathe, Jonathan said. Like a weight has been lifted. Ethan nodded. Your brother would be proud of you. You gave his truth the justice it deserved. Jonathan turned to Ethan, a rare smile softening his features. And you, Ethan, you gave me the courage to face this. I don't think I would have done it without you. Ethan smiled back. Sometimes, We just need someone to remind us what we're capable of." As they stood in the fading light, the city below seemed to pulse with a renewed sense of possibility, as if the truth they'd uncovered had begun to cleanse not just the Radcliffe name, but the world around them. The weeks following the publication of Catherine's story were a whirlwind of consequences and reflection. Investigations into the corruption exposed by the Radcliffe ledger swept through the city, bringing long-overdue accountability to those who had thrived on deceit. Jonathan faced questions from every corner. Journalists, board members, and the public demanded to know how much he had known and whether he was complicit. He met the scrutiny head-on, holding a press conference where he revealed the full story of his father's misdeeds. "This is not the legacy I wish to leave," he said. "Today we turn a new page. Transparency, accountability, and justice will define Radcliffe Enterprises moving forward." His honesty won him cautious respect, but it was clear his road to rebuilding trust would be long. For Ethan, life had also changed. His work at the Radcliffe Tower became a source of pride, as tenants and colleagues noticed his dedication and resilience. The story had brought him a sense of closure he hadn't realized he needed, and with it came a new confidence. One day, as he repaired a window in the building, Mrs. Lane approached him with her characteristic warmth. "I read the papers," she said. "You and Mr. Radcliffe did something extraordinary." Ethan smiled. "I was just following where the path led," Mrs. Lane chuckled. "And sometimes that's all it takes to change the world. A little courage to keep walking." Jonathan and Ethan's friendship deepened in the aftermath of their shared journey. Jonathan offered Ethan a permanent position at Radcliffe Enterprises, but Ethan declined. "I think I've found where I belong," he said, gesturing to the Radcliffe Tower. "I've spent too much time trying to survive. Now I want to live, and I want to help others do the same." Jonathan nodded. "Then I'll make sure you have the support you need. And if you ever change your mind, the offer stands." On a crisp autumn morning, Jonathan invited Ethan to visit the old summer house one last time. As they walked through the now abandoned property, Jonathan carried a small box containing his brother's journal, letters, and the locket. "I've decided to let this place go," Jonathan said. "It holds too many memories, but it's time to let the past rest." Ethan watched as Jonathan placed the box beneath a tree on the property, covering it gently with soil. "Why leave it here?" Ethan asked. Jonathan smiled faintly. "Because this is where it all began, and where it should stay." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the past finally easing. In the months that followed, Ethan and Jonathan stayed in touch, their bond forged through shared struggle and triumph. The Radcliffe name slowly began to rebuild, not as a symbol of wealth and power, but as one of integrity and change. For Ethan, the journey had been transformative. What began as an act of honesty, returning a stranger's wallet, had led him to find purpose, friendship, and a life he never thought possible. And though he would always carry the scars of his struggles, he walked forward with hope, knowing that even the smallest actions could ripple into something far greater. As the city thrived under the newfound light of truth, the legacy of Ethan Radcliffe lived on, not just in the actions of his brother and namesake, but in the quiet belief that the truth, no matter how painful, could always set us free. The end.